Chapter 2. The Flowers of Evil. The fez that bled through time. The investigators were not themselves. Gone were the burdens of memory, the names they had clung to, the lives they had once led. No Claudia, no Giovanni, no Leopold or Elijah. In their place were new identities, rich with emotion, shadowed by the echo of déjà vu, yet embraced as absolute truth. Professor Harold Harry Worth blinked at the candle-lit ceiling above him, fingers brushing against the stiff linen of his study coat. His pulse beat slowly, steadily, as if he had just come up from deep water. Somewhere in his mind, something pulled, like a rope tugging from a dream half-remembered. He was a man of intellect, a seasoned archaeologist, with dusty years of Cappadocian sun in his skin and ancient secrets locked in his bones. Beside him, the young ruffian George Banks flexed his nimble fingers. His eyes darted to the shadows, the instinct of a snakesman who had slipped through more windows than doors in his time. Something in him whispered that he had once lived poorer, faster, rougher, but that life was now this one. He was George, had always been. Amelia Meadowcroft, perched near the cracked window of their temporary boarding house, twirled a small polished revolver. Her lips curled into a smile that was equal parts thrill and disdain. This was no place for a woman of society. But what did society know of real danger, real purpose? She remembered jungles and deserts and the sting of gossip in drawing rooms. But she knew who she was, Amelia, adventurer, daughter of Sir Meredith Meadowcroft, unwed by choice and ready to abandon the expectations of a dull world. Dr. Kasim Polat adjusted the cuffs of his jacket. The room was thick with London fog, but his thoughts were of home, of Bursa, of his wife's letters, of his children's laughter. He didn't remember being anyone else, and if there had been a life before, it was drowned by the call of history and empire. His Turkish heart was proud, his faith quiet but firm, his mind already turning toward the dangers ahead. And Dr. Jean-Louis Saroche, ever the skeptic, ever the pragmatist, peered over his wire-rimmed spectacles and considered the others. His long years in Egypt had given him the patience of the desert and the wisdom of a man who knew better than to chase shadows. Yet something about this gathering, it reeked of fate. Then came the knock. A street urchin stood in the hall, pale with the cold, his teeth chattering even as he held up a folded message.
"From Professor Smith,"
he said.
"Urgent."
The paper was thin, the ink quick and sharp. "Am at 5 Durwood Street, Whitechapel. For God's sake, come. Bring a gun. Julius Smith." The night was wet, the cobblestones slick with rain, and the scent of horseblood from a nearby slaughterhouse. Number 5 Durwood Street loomed in shadows. There, pacing beneath the broken gaslight, was Professor Smith. He looked smaller in the dark, his shoulders hunched, his eyes twitching from alley to corner. He ushered them inside quickly, coins pressed into the hand of the elderly landlady, Mrs. Grimm. Upstairs, the smell hit first, a cloying rot that seemed to breathe from the walls themselves. The room was dim, 2 flickering candles casting monstrous silhouettes over the sagging bed and its occupant. The man, if he could still be called that, was wasted to the bone, skin clinging to him like wet paper. And beside him, a cloaked figure, unmoving, breathing only in silence. The air buzzed with wrongness. Smith spoke in a hush, urgency strangling his words. 4 days ago, men in fezzes had dragged this victim in, semi-conscious, watched over by a silver-haired gentleman in a top hat. Each night since, the horrors had grown. Whispers that slithered between walls, shadows that danced without light, shrieks that turned bone to ice. Tonight had been the worst. The men were gone. Only the thing on the bed remained. A police doctor, Dr. Hobbs, had examined the victim. He could not determine what plagued him, but he did note one impossible thing. The fez on the man's head could not be removed. Sarok bent to study him. What he saw turned his stomach. The fez had fused to the scalp. The skin had grown around it, the fibers threading into the very flesh. Then the man screamed. It was a sound that fractured the room. His body jerked, convulsed. His eyes rolled back, and he gave a final rattling breath. The fez, as if satisfied, tumbled to the floor. Hobbs stepped forward, and that was when the light vanished. Darkness swallowed the room, the candles snuffed as though by a great wind, and in the black, a terrible crunch, a scream, Hobbs, and then the wet sound of tearing. The corpse had risen. It was not a man anymore, but something else, driven by hate and hunger. Teeth found flesh, blood slicked the boards. They fought. They had no choice. Smith fled. The others stayed, steel and flame and fury against the impossible. When the thing finally collapsed, twitching and still, the Fez lay motionless beside it, innocent once more. Later, at Smith's club, with hands still shaking and eyes hollowed by what they'd seen, they heard the truth. The man had been Matthew Pook, a student of a Professor Demir in Constantinople. He had tried to steal the blood-red Fez from a man named Menkaf. He had failed. Now the Fez needed to be destroyed. Smith begged them, take it to Constantinople, take it to Demir, take it far away before London drowned in nightmares. They agreed, and somewhere inside each of them, though they could not know it, the real investigators, the ones holding the diary in the Calais coach, moved in restless sleep. The page would soon turn again. The Scarlet Mandate. Fog coiled through the lamp-lit streets of London like a living thing, slinking between hansom cabs and curling up around the boots of those called to reckon with ancient evil. In the quiet wood-panelled lounge of the Oriental Club, the fire crackled low. Professor Julius Arthur Smith sat hunched forward, his voice no louder than a whisper, but weighted with centuries of fear.
I cannot go east again,
he said. The candlelight flickered across his face, casting long shadows that danced with every subtle twitch of his hand. He looked pale, haunted in a way no fever could explain.
If I set foot on Ottoman soil,
he continued,
they'll find me. The cultists, the ones who serve Selim Makriat. I stood against him. That's why he's hunting me still.
The room fell into silence, the investigators listening with unblinking eyes.
But Professor Demir still lives,
Smith said.
He saved my life once. I trust him. He alone may know how to destroy the Fez. You must get it to him. Take it to Constantinople.
He hesitated, then added,
before it consumes someone else.
The investigators, Amelia, George, Pollard, Sarok, Worth, exchanged glances. The choice had already been made the moment they laid eyes on the Fez's blood-soaked threads. They agreed.
I've made arrangements,
Smith said, producing a folded telegram.
A friend of mine, Baron von Hoffler, a scholar of the occult, has agreed to meet you in Vienna and accompany you the rest of the way. He is well-funded.
That last point proved decisive. For a journey like this, there could be no second-class travel. The Orient Express, a miracle of rail and modern luxury, would carry them across Europe faster than any ship. Safer than the fog-choked streets of London, for now. Before departure, the investigators fanned out across the city to scour every library and club worth their salt. The British Museum Reading Room, the archives of the Oriental Club. Private tomes kept locked behind brass gates. The trail led deeper than expected. Piece by piece, parchment by parchment, they assembled their own account of the Apocrypha of the Fez. What they learned chilled the blood. The blood-red Fez was no ceremonial garb. An evil thing made in the name of powers so ancient, so profane, no sane man would dare speak them. Some claimed it was first seen in the Ottoman court around 1550. Others insisted it predated even Rome, born in the temples of forgotten Anatolian gods or whispered in the Dionysian rites of Thrace. A red crown of dominion, a device of control, a relic that chose its wearers as much as it was worn. Always the same result: madness, corruption, and transformation. Worse still, it seemed the Fez was tied to a text, a forbidden book, the Whispering Fez, a relic in its own right, bound in black leather and filled with arcane formulas, possession rituals, and accounts of what happened to those who dared wear the Fez. Backtracking the trail of Matthew Pook, they found his lodgings, dusty, disheveled, abandoned in haste. Tucked into a hidden compartment beneath loose floorboards was a diary, torn, smudged, but still legible. Within, a confession. He had witnessed the murder of a fez collector, one Joshua DeVore. Worse, he had seen the assassin, Menkaf. But that name, as they soon learned, was only an alias. A second name appeared in the diary, scrawled with growing panic: Leeds. They followed that clue to the collector's cottage in Rotherhithe. A quiet, damp little house with more secrets than windows. Inside, they found a letter from a Mr. Leeds, Pera, Constantinople, offering £100 for the book The Whispering Fez, which he understood DeVore had acquired. No address, no return. Dated 2 weeks before. The clues converged. Menkaf, Leeds, was on the move, and the Fez had not waited for them. It had already begun its journey eastward. They would have to follow. And as the train whistled from the platform, hissing like a serpent eager for prey, the wind over London felt sharper than it had hours before. As if something had noticed them. As if something had begun to watch. The Fez devours all. The tickets were printed on thick paper, filigree ink, and a waxy crest pressed into the corner. They read Compagnie Internationale des Wagons Lits et des Grands Express Européens. But what they really meant was this: the descent had begun. Baron von Hoffler's telegram had come through just in time, wiring the necessary funds to Professor Smith. With the weight of aristocratic wealth behind them, the investigators were able to secure berths on the Simplon Orient Express, the most luxurious and swiftest train across Europe. Only hours remained before they crossed into shadows no man should follow. At 10 a.m., the iron gates of Victoria Station loomed before them. Amelia Meadowcroft, Dr. Worth, George Banks, Dr. Saroch, and Dr. Polat stood beneath the glass canopy, watching steam rise in lazy spirals from the great engine that would carry them toward Constantinople. They watched the English countryside blur past, the hedgerows of Kent, the snowy edges of Canterbury, the white cliffs of Dover shining under a bitter sun. The steamer across the channel was brief. Cold, salt wind bit at their coats as they crossed toward Calais, where, after a short layover, they boarded a connecting train toward Chalon-sur-Marne. There, at 10:26 p.m., the Orient Express awaited. The locomotive gleamed like obsidian and gold, its deep blue paint lacquered and glistening in the gaslight. Attendants in crisp livery bowed and ushered them into sleeping cars lined with mahogany, velvet curtains, and brass fixtures polished to a mirror shine. The world of reason was behind them. Only madness lay ahead. They did not know Menkaf Leeds was on board. But by the time they reached Bulgaria, they would. Passengers began to change across the Alps. Their eyes dulled, their smiles grew glassy. Strange shapes shifted behind their reflections in the windows. Waiters moved with too much precision, shadows crawled without light, and the whispers began. The Fez knows you. You cannot resist it. You are already part of it. One by one, passengers fell. Their bodies began to twist, their limbs contorting as if rewritten by a mad composer. Their skin grew tight and red, scalps splitting to reveal roots of fabric. Scarlet strands, grown from their very minds. The Fez had come alive. As they crossed the rugged mountains of Bulgarian, they found Menkaf in a locked compartment near the rear of the train, his eyes shining with the gleam of revelation and decay. He had donned the Fez. It had not consumed him. He had mastered it. Or so he thought. Around him lay scraps of parchment, blood-slicked ritual implements, the desecrated remains of the Whispering Fez. In the confined sanctum of his private sleeper, he was conducting a spell, the likes of which even the most blasphemous tomes dared not name. A summoning, an opening, a tearing of reality itself. The investigators struck. There was no time to think, no time to plan. Amelia's pistol cracked in the corridor. Dr. Worth hurled a chair. Pollet cried out in Turkish, invoking words he had never known before that moment. But Menkaf was already gone, not in body, but in mind. The Fez had opened something inside him, a gate, and then the train split, not in steel, not in bolts, but in existence. The stars bled. The compartment tore open like a wet scroll, and Yog-Sothoth, the key and the gate, the father of sorcerers, answered. Not with words, not with wrath, but with presence. A sphere of impossible angles expanded outward from Menkav's ritual. The walls turned inside out. Time fell apart like dust. The investigators reached for one another and found only light. Blinding, infinite, maddening. One by one, they were unmade. Their bodies folded like paper lanterns. Their minds unraveled into forgotten languages. Their names vanished into the void. In the heart of the shuddering train, as reality tore like parchment around them, it was Henri, the Belgian conductor, his crisp uniform now bloodied and torn, who made the final stand. With trembling hands and unflinching resolve, he raised a battered double-barrel shotgun and fired point-blank into Menkav's chest, the impact flinging the sorcerer back into the rift he had summoned. But the price was immediate. As Yog-Sothoth surged through the torn veil in one final unfathomable convulsion of space and will, a tendril of brilliance, like liquid geometry, lashed out and obliterated Henri's head in a flash of white fire. Only Amelia, flung to the floor by the blast, was left breathing, alone, untouched, and forever changed. She awoke on the floor of the train, her dress torn, her skin blood-smeared but unbroken. Silence reigned. All around her, nothing stirred. The present. The diary fell shut. The investigators gasped and blinked, themselves once more awake in the soft-lit compartment between Calais and Paris, the pages of the 1893 journal trembling in Claudia's hands. They could remember nothing. No screams, no Fez, no Menkav, only a feeling, like a bruise on the soul, like they had just died. Somewhere beneath the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails, a whisper echoed, "You've worn it already." And as the train pulled into Gare du Nord, the lights of Paris sparkled outside the windows. But inside the carriage, the shadows had not lifted. The Comte's shadow. The Orient Express slid into Gare du Nord beneath a pallid sky, its steam hissing like a serpent disturbed. The investigators, still rattled from their surreal passage through Smith's diary, disembarked into the morning fog of the French capital, shaken and silent. None dared to speak of the memories that clung like cobwebs. None remembered what had passed. And yet something inside them had shifted. Paris welcomed them with grandeur and indifference. The group found refuge at the Hotel Vendôme, a stately establishment nestled on the right bank. Its opulence a buffer against the world's darker corners. It became their anchor in a city both beautiful and malign, a place to regroup as they pursued their next lead. Leopold and Elijah were the first to dive into the mystery. The Bibliothèque Nationale, a cathedral of knowledge, greeted them with the dust of centuries and the solemn quiet of guarded truths. Within its archives, they unearthed a tale buried by revolution and horror. In a brittle military report dated June 1789, Captain Louis Malon described a raid on the villa of Comte Fenalique, a nobleman whose debaucheries had become legend. Malon's words trembled even in ink.
When we arrived, the feast was still in progress, men and women rotting like rabid dogs. We chased them out, arresting the ones who were not able to vouch for themselves. I sent 6 men to capture the Comte, while I entered the chambers beneath. I cannot bring myself to describe what I saw there, save that we had entered a cesspool and it was hell. God protect us. We managed to ensnare the Comte.
But Fenalic's punishment had not been death. A second document, the journal of court physician Lucien Rigaud, detailed his fate.
2 nights later, the king's men raided the Comte's villa to halt his excesses. After they burned his mansion, they brought the Comte before the king's deputy, who ordered me present to deliver an opinion. Fenalic was screaming and writhing. It was easy to see that he was mad. As a nobleman and a madman, he could not be executed. So I suggested a merciful king might place him in Charenton. The king approved. Fenalic was taken there, and I later learned that he was locked away in a cellar because he attacked other patients.
A nobleman cast into darkness, a villa scorched from the earth. 2 names now burned in the investigators' minds, Poissy and Charenton. The grey light of a Parisian morning filtered through stained glass as Giovanni stepped into the quiet hush of Église Saint-Roch. one of the oldest Baroque churches nestled in the first arrondissement. The musty scent of frankincense and old leather greeted him as he descended into the crypt archives, guided by a soft-spoken Dominican brother who left him alone with a key and a warning.
Some texts are sealed for a reason.
Giovanni lit a candle and moved through row upon row of forgotten codices, his fingers tracing spines etched with Latin and Greek. Then he found it. Bound in flaking crimson leather, its pages brittle with age, the book bore no title. But within the opening folio, scrawled in ink faded to rust, he read, Simular Diaboli, the Devil's Simular. It spoke not in riddles, but in half-truths, of the Fourth Crusade and the sack of Constantinople, of relics carried away from shattered altars, of the simulacrum carved in blasphemy and wrath, and of a man, unnamed but suggested, who wore the fez like a crown and commanded shadows to dance for him. Giovanni closed the book gently, his hands cold. He no longer needed divine affirmation. The thing they hunted was older than kings, and it had never stopped listening. Elsewhere in the city, Claudia wandered alone. She had told the others it was to clear her head, but she followed something subtler, a hunch, or perhaps the faint whisper of Marco, her twin, still coiled like smoke in the back of her mind. The Louvre loomed quiet beneath a thinning winter sky, its arcades echoing with the steps of tourists and docents. Claudia approached a greying curator and, with a charm as smooth as velvet, asked for a private tour through the galleries tied to the Revolution.
I've heard,
She murmured.
that your collection includes pieces once owned by Queen Marie. Sketches, forgotten things.
The curator, intrigued and eager to share, led her into a quiet corner of the Denon wing, dusty and seldom visited, where frames hung crooked and labels faded with time. And there she saw it. A sketch. Rough charcoal lines, dated to the late 18th century, captured what seemed to be an opulent bedchamber. But in its corner, standing just outside the four-poster's canopy, was a figure. A man dressed in noble finery, his face sharp, cruel, almost smiling. Claudia felt her stomach twist. He stared not at the sketch's scene, but at her. The nobleman's eyes locked with hers across centuries. She could not look away.
Ah, Madame?
The curator's voice broke her trance.
I believe this study here was once misattributed to David, though we now know...
She turned to listen, just for a second. When she looked back, the nobleman was gone. The sketch now depicted only the bedroom. The empty bed, a faint outline of shadow, where once a figure had stood.
There was someone there.
Claudia whispered. The curator blinked.
Pardon?
There was a man, a noble, in the painting, watching me.
The curator shook his head.
That piece has never featured a figure. It's simply listed as Sketch for an Unknown Painting, 18th century, found amongst the possessions of Queen Marie. Some believe it depicts the interior of a royal guest villa in Poissy.
Claudia's hands tightened on the strap of her purse.
Of course.
She murmured,
How silly of me.
but her blood ran cold. That afternoon, her unease pulled her elsewhere. With Rose at her side, Claudia joined a public tour of the Paris catacombs, seeking something deeper. The catacombs smelled of old earth and memory. Skulls lined the walls in reverent stacks, grinning in mute communion.
I feel him here.
Claudia said softly, her voice barely audible over the guide's rehearsed script.
Marco. Or something like him.
The guide turned a corner. The group followed, but Claudia did not. She slipped into a narrow corridor, unseen. Rose called after her, but the tunnel swallowed her footsteps. It was quiet in this part, too quiet. Then she saw it, a fleshless creature, pale and sinewed like a spider carved from bone, crawling along the wall. It paused when it saw her. Its lipless mouth struggled as if to form a word.
Guillaume.
Then its eyes widened, and it screamed, a long broken cry of terror,
Phenolic.
and vanished into the dark. Claudia stood frozen, her brother's whispers stirring in her ears like dead leaves. Then came footsteps.
Madame!
barked the guide.
This area is restricted.
Behind him, Rose appeared, breathless and flushed with worry. Claudia said nothing. The tour ended early. As they emerged back into daylight, Claudia bit her lip, her gaze drifting back toward the catacomb gate.
I'll come back
She thought.
when the city sleeps.
Paris had its charm, its elegance, its grandeur, but beneath the city, below the polished avenues and gaslit cafes, lurked a far older story. That night, at the Hôtel Vendôme, the investigators gathered for dinner in a private salon. The wine flowed easily. The conversation wandered with slow, intoxicated grace. Claudia was quiet for most of it, swirling her burgundy in its crystal glass. Rose watched her with subtle worry. Eventually, Claudia leaned in, her voice low.
I'm going back.
She whispered.
Tonight. Into the catacombs.
Rose blinked.
Claudia, no.
I saw something.
She said.
Marco's voice trembled down there. There's something he wants me to find.
And what if it finds you first?
Claudia only smiled.
Then you know where to bury what's left of me.
An hour later, Claudia slipped out of the hotel, a long coat hiding her finer clothing. Rose was only seconds behind. They reached the familiar gate at the entrance of the catacombs, now locked for the night. The moon hung above Paris like a blind eye. Claudia vaulted the wrought iron fence in a clean motion, the long silk of her scarf catching briefly on the spear-tipped bars before she landed with a muffled crunch on the gravel beyond.
Claudia!
Rose hissed, but she was already gone, the door to the ossuary creaking open like a sigh. Then footsteps. A gendarme patrolling on foot turned the corner, his lantern beam falling directly on Rose. She didn't hesitate.
Oh, monsieur!
She cried in broken French, her face flushed and wide-eyed.
My mistress, she wandered off. Too much champagne. I thought she came this way.
The gendarme raised an eyebrow, looking toward the gate.
Very private woman. Terribly embarrassing.
She added. He grunted, skeptical but distracted enough. Rose led him away with a torrent of apologies and practiced charm. But when she turned back, the gate had already closed. She bit her lip. Then she ran. Back at the hotel, Rose roused Giovanni, Leopold, and Dr. Marsh.
She's gone in,
She said.
alone.
Without pause, they followed. The streets of Montparnasse were quieter now, but neighbors had begun to murmur as they saw the group gathering again near the entrance. A curtain twitched. A light flickered on. When a policeman strolled up from the south end of the street, Leopold didn't miss a beat. He staggered sideways, laughing in exaggerated drunkenness, calling out loudly about a lost cat named Voltaire. The officer, irritated and confused, moved to deal with him. Giovanni and Marsh slipped into the shadows. Rose followed. Deep below, Claudia moved like a ghost between bones. The catacombs closed around her like a coffin carved in limestone. She held a candle in one hand, her other clutching a slip of parchment, a ritual she had memorized from the books she dared not show the others. The old Latin whispered from her lips.
Frater, apparabit mihi. Marco, tu qui es? Audimi.
Something answered. But it was not Marco. A gust of air extinguished her candle. The silence broke with a whisper that wasn't breath and a chill that wasn't wind. From the black came the wraiths, fleshless, sightless, all hunger. They surged forward like a tide of memories twisted by rage. Claudia ran. Above, in the outer galleries, Marsh's ears caught the echo first. A shriek, high and piercing, bouncing down stone corridors like a hunted violin note. Giovanni paled.
Claudia.
They ran. Twisting passages and uneven stairs led them down, deeper than tourists ever went. The bones piled higher. The inscriptions on the wall grew older, darker. Candles flickered in ancient sconces where no staff had placed them. Ahead, movement. Rose called out,
Claudia!
No answer. Then another scream, closer. They rounded a final bend and found her. Claudia, disheveled, eyes wide, her hands torn by stone, was backed against a pillar of stacked skulls as two black forms reached toward her, drifting, shrieking, writhing. Giovanni raised his crucifix, reciting Latin with trembling conviction. Marsh lit a torch, its sudden flare cutting the dark like a blade. The wraiths hissed and recoiled, retreating into cracks that hadn't existed moments before. Then all was still.
Claudia,
Collapsed into Rose's arms, breathing hard.
Marco brought them.
She whispered.
No,
Rose said, holding her close.
you did.
They climbed out into the night, bones behind them and Paris breathing coldly once more. The sky was just beginning to grey with morning. A dress, a gaze, a fall. After the horrors of the night beneath Paris, the darkness, the screams, the thing that bore her brother's name, Claudia rose late, but determined.
I need something light.
She declared.
Breakfast?
Rose asked, her voice hopeful.
Silk.
Gallery's Lafayette was a prism of light and colour, its stained glass dome glowing like a temple ceiling, perfume drifting like incense, the murmur of Parisian commerce rich and seductive. Here, the horrors of catacombs and wraiths seemed miles away. Claudia was in her element, striding from counter to counter like a conductor of luxury. But it was not just for her.
Rose,
She said, pausing by a gold-framed mirror.
try this.
The maid blinked at the garment, ivory lace, hand-stitched.
I couldn't.
You will.
Claudia said.
You saved my life last night. You deserve to be seen.
It was not an order, it was love, something close to sisterhood. Rose, red-cheeked, allowed herself to be fitted and fussed over, her curls pinned in an elegant upsweep. For a moment, they were not investigators or fugitives from the supernatural. They were simply women, and the world was briefly kind. They went sightseeing afterward, arm in arm, the Seine glittering beneath a pale sun. As the day waned, the silhouette of the Eiffel Tower rose ahead of them, an iron crown against a cotton sky. They did not speak of why they went there. Not out loud, but Claudia felt it, the pull. At the top, the city stretched in all directions, grey and gold. They stood at the railing, wind tugging at their coats. Rose pointed.
Look!
Down below, a figure stood among the ants of tourists, a nobleman too far to see clearly, and yet he was watching. Claudia knew that stance, that face, the painting. He had stepped out of canvas and into daylight, and still he smiled. The elevator buzzed. They stepped inside, the attendant tipping his cap. The iron door groaned shut. But as the cabin began to descend, Rose's eyes widened. She heard it first, a high metallic ping, the sound of steel under strain. Something snapped, a cable.
Claudia!
Without hesitation, Rose shoved her. The doors opened just enough at the landing to allow them to tumble out. Claudia hit the floor hard, Rose's arms still around her. Then the elevator dropped. Screams followed. Not long, just enough. Then a wet, final silence. 6 passengers, decapitated, the falling cab slicing through them like the blade of a guillotine. Blood pooled on the grating, a handbag tumbled after. The police arrived quickly. The gendarmerie swarmed the tower, ushering tourists away, questioning the survivors. Claudia and Rose were detained for hours, their testimony written and rewritten in shaking script. Claudia said little. Rose did most of the talking, calm but sharp, her voice betraying just enough tremor to suggest trauma, but not guilt. They were released as dusk fell, but neither of them spoke on the ride back to the hotel. In her mind, Claudia saw him again, standing far below her, watching, not with hatred, but with patience. On the other side of the city, Charenton Asylum stood like a monument to forgotten pain. High walls wrapped around it like a shroud, ivy curling through cracks in the stone. Though the asylum's facade bore the chill civility of French institutional order, Elijah and Leopold could sense it as they approached. Something beneath the surface still festered. It was not madness, it was memory. The pair, posing as medical researchers with letters forged well enough to pass casual scrutiny, gained access through the front gate. They were directed to the small, functional library, where recent obituaries and hospital records were catalogued in bureaucratic precision. There they found it. We mourn the loss of Dr. Etienne Delplace, a man of the highest professional standards. His tragic accident comes as a great blow to the field of neurology and to the community at large. Dr. Francois Leroux, acting director. But whispers told a different tale. A tired nurse, Paul Mandrin, approached them in the corridor with the hesitant steps of someone who had seen too much and was willing to tell just enough to make it stop rattling in his head.
Del Place was obsessed,
He whispered.
He had a patient, one that wasn't supposed to be here. No name, no records. They say he'd been here since before the war, perhaps even before the last century.
Where is he now?
Elijah asked. Mandrin's eyes darted to a hallway sealed with rusted chains.
Gone,
He said.
After that night, Del Place tried something, electrotherapy. He wanted to wake the man up, said he was close to unlocking some key to dreams, to memory.
Elijah raised an eyebrow.
And what happened?
Mandrin shook his head.
He died screaming. We found him with his mouth burned, his eyes.
He looked away.
The patient's cell was empty, as if he'd never been there.
Leopold frowned.
Or as if someone didn't want him to be found.
That same day, seeking peace and solitude, Giovanni took his sketchbook and ventured north to the Parc des Buttes-Chaumont. The gardens were quiet in the way only Parisian parks could be. Half forgotten, but quietly magnificent. Cherry trees bowed over gravel paths, and lovers strolled beneath bridges fashioned after Roman ruins. He sat by the Temple de la Sibylle, his fingers moving gently across the page as he sketched the scene before him. The small lake, the footbridge, the swan drifting across the mirrored water, until something moved beneath the surface. He paused. At first, he thought it a trick of the light, perhaps a carp or the glint of a bottle. Then eyes, yellow, wide, watching, and a laugh, software inhuman. It echoed not across the surface, but within his own skull. Giovanni stepped forward, peering into the depths of the water. And then something grabbed him, cold fingers, or perhaps tendrils. He couldn't tell. They pulled. He fought. Flailing, choking, the water swallowing his rosary, his sketchbook. He was saved only when two elderly joggers, startled by the splash, dragged him to the banks, coughing and shaking. There was nothing in the water, but he would not speak for some time. That evening, the investigators reconvened at the Hotel Vendôme. Their voices were low, their meals untouched. Elijah recounted what Charenton had hidden, how memory itself had been a weapon in the hands of a mad doctor. Giovanni remained silent for a long time before he finally said,
I was watched. In the water, something left.
Claudia stared into her wine.
I saw him again,
She murmured.
at the Eiffel Tower. The nobleman. He followed us.
No one asked who she meant. They all knew. Each had touched something today, something ancient, patient, waiting. There was no toast, no jokes, no plans for tomorrow, only silence, and the weight of what now surrounded them. The arm beneath the roses. The morning train to Poissy rattled lightly through the frost-glazed French countryside, cutting across thin streams and quiet woodlands like a vein of steel. For the investigators, the journey was silent. The weight of their many clues, Charenton, Fanalic, the sketch, the screams in the catacombs, had brought them here, to the villa, the last clue, the last chance to find the piece of the simulacrum hidden in Paris before the Orient Express whistled its way eastward. Tension was palpable among the investigators. The train left them with barely enough time for the search. The wind bit as they stepped onto the quiet platform. Poissy was no longer the country retreat of nobility. It was a working town of laborers and families, its cobbled charm weathered by time. They first made for the town hall, a pale two-story structure with simple neoclassical columns and an indifferent staff. The moment Rose, Giovanni, and Claudia tried to inquire in English, the clerks offered only shrugs and curt nods. But when Leopold switched to French, his Belgian accent smooth but unmistakable, and Elijah added quiet, thoughtful words in clipped academic tones, the officials softened. Records of the Villa Lorient. No, nothing precise, but yes, the house stood on old foundations, older than the Revolution. To reach the site, they walked back toward the Church of Saint-Louis, the bell tower visible even now through bare trees. They passed the grim facade of the Maison d'Arrêt de Poissy, a converted convent, now a prison. Wives and daughters huddled beneath shawls outside the gate, clutching envelopes and thermoses, waiting for the guards to grant visitation. It made Claudia shiver. The same walls had once housed prayers and now bore the weight of punishment. And then they saw it. The Villa Lorient, a graceful estate surrounded by a tall, crumbling wall of old brick, the kind that knew history by scent. Twisted rose bushes clung to its surface, thorns like rusted hooks. In spring, it might have been beautiful. Now, in the dry cold of winter, it looked like something waiting to bleed. They were greeted at the door by a man in his 50s, clean-shaven, warm-eyed, speaking halting English. Dr. Christian Lorient, the town's physician. His smile was as welcoming as the hearth behind him.
My home interests you? Please, come in.
Inside, they met his wife, Marie, who moved stiffly, her left arm curled protectively at her side.
Arthritis,
Christian explained.
only the left. Strange, no?
Their daughter, Quitterie, was polite but shy, a wisp of a child with searching eyes. Dinner was offered and accepted. Simple but hearty fare, flavored with good conversation. Claudia, ever gracious, told stories of Boston. Elijah remained reserved. Leopold, loosening slightly, made the girl laugh with tales of Belgium's stormy winters. For a moment, it almost felt normal, until Quitterie cried out. She had spilled tea on herself, scalding her left arm. The girl's scream brought the table to its feet. Christian rushed to help, as did Marie. They soothed her gently, kissed her forehead, carried her upstairs. When they returned, Giovanni couldn't help but notice the thin red scratches across Christian's own left arm, almost like slashes.
Haha,
He laughed nervously,
the roses, you see. I am clumsy with pruning.
but his eyes didn't meet theirs. The Loriens were kind. That, perhaps, made it worse. After the burn, Quitterie had been lovingly soothed, her arm wrapped in salve and linen by her mother, kissed on the forehead by her father, and tucked into bed with soft words and a lullaby Claudia recognized from her own childhood. For all the unease in the villa, the creaking walls, the creeping ivy, the way the air in certain corners felt just slightly too cold, this family was warm, so it felt like a betrayal when they brought it up. After dinner, Leopold cleared his throat.
There's something we hope to ask about your foundations.
Christian Lorien raised an eyebrow.
Foundations?
There may be chambers beneath the house.
Elijah added carefully.
The land itself, before the revolution, there was another structure here, and it may have had secrets.
The couple exchanged uncertain glances. Marie was the first to speak.
There is a wall in the cellar, yes. It never sat quite right. Old. The brick doesn't match the rest of the renovations.
Christian nodded.
We assumed it was just part of the original wine storage. The house has gone through many hands.
He stood up, excusing himself momentarily. When he returned, it was with an old envelope, the edges yellowed and the ink slightly bled.
It arrived some months ago,
He explained.
from Switzerland. Addressed not to us, but simply to the occupants. I meant to reply, but life intervened.
He handed it to Claudia.
You may copy it if it helps your research.
She unfolded the letter. The script was precise, scholarly. French, though easy to translate. 50 Rue Saint-Étienne, Lausanne, Switzerland. To whom it may concern, I realize that I am a complete stranger and that this letter may well mean nothing to you. My name is Edgar Wellington, and I am researching the history of a statue known most commonly as the Sedefkar simulacrum. I recently came into possession of an old scroll which presents an intriguing description of the item. This piqued my interest, and I am now endeavoring to trace the simulacrum. My search has led me to your address. The name is probably meaningless to you, but through my researches, I have learned that the last recorded resting place of the piece of art was in the house that occupied your land in the late 18th century. The statue was a unique Arabian artifact, lost during the events of 1789. Its last owner was a German nobleman who once lived where you live today. Please, I ask that if you have heard any local stories regarding this item, or maybe found any traces of the old house and its possessions on your land, which might give a clue as to the eventual fate of the object, would you be so kind as to write to me with a summary of the information? I apologize for the rather strange nature of my request, but I feel that I should pursue whatever leads remain to me. I hope that you will not go to any great length regarding this. Yours most sincerely, Edgar Wellington. The name rang hollow in the dining room air.
Wellington,
Giovanni murmured, the name sticking to his tongue like prophecy. No one needed to say it aloud, the next destination was clear. But first, the wall. The story of the letter, the curious wall, the history half-spoken. These things hovered over the Lorien's hearth like mist. And then Christian, with a sigh and a weak smile, said,
Well, shall we see it then?
By lamplight, they descended into the cellar. The Loriens led the way, Christian still chuckling lightly, Marie half curious, half dubious. The investigators followed in silence. The air below was colder than it should have been. The stone walls whispered old humidity and older secrets. There it was. The wall. It didn't belong. Even the Loriens now admitted it. The bricks were uneven, damp, set in a mortar that smelled of ash. Tools were fetched. Christian insisted on helping. Together they tore it down, and the earth gave way. Behind the false wall, a tunnel, rough-hewn, supported by rotting timber and the will of silence. They entered with care. Claudia led the way, lantern in hand. Her eyes were fixed, her breath slow. They emerged into a chamber of rot. The soil was soft and treacherous underfoot. Bones, human and not, lay tangled in the dirt. The stone walls were etched with deep grooves, bite marks, claw marks, curses. Vines, thick and black, pushed through the foundation, coiled like worms fattened on corpses. Thorns jutted like knives, and in the center of it all, a limb, a stone arm, human in form but wholly alien in aura. Its skin was a patchwork of smooth flesh and ancient symbols, its hand half curled into a beckoning claw. It pulsed. With light. With life. With hunger. Claudia didn't ask. She stepped forward and pried it free. The moment her fingers touched the simulacrum, a wave of cold exhaled from the chamber. The walls quivered. The vines recoiled. Her glove crinkled with pressure. Her own left arm twisted, as if mirroring the artifact. She gasped, clutching her shoulder, but it was too late. Whatever this object was, it was now part of her. Above, a shout, a scream. They rushed back up the stairs, the simulacrum wrapped hastily in cloth. In the hallway, Marie stood pale and trembling.
It's Quittery,
She whispered.
She saw someone.
Claudia opened the girl's door. The child sat bolt upright in bed, clutching her blanket. Her voice trembled.
A man was outside, watching me.
What man?
Giovanni asked softly.
He looked like a prince or a noble in old clothes. He smiled at me.
The window was closed, locked. But the frost on the glass bore a handprint. And 5 seconds later, Christian touched his wife's shoulder.
My arm,
he said. He flexed it, smooth, painless. The arthritis was gone. They left quickly. There were apologies, hastily muttered thanks. The Loriens seemed confused, grateful somehow, but disoriented. Claudia didn't look back. As they reached the platform, the Orient Express waited, steam pouring from its flanks like breath from a sleeping god. They boarded in silence, and beneath her coat, Claudia flexed her left hand, feeling the ache twist deep in the bone. The arm was with them now, and it was only the first piece. A promise of grandeur. As the investigators prepared to leave Paris, they encountered Caterina Cavallaro, the celebrated soprano, full of charm and vitality, still high from the triumph of her latest performance. She spoke of Milan as one speaks of a lover, passionate, full of admiration, eager to return. Over an intimate gathering in the Orient Express, she regaled them with stories of her childhood, her first visit to Teatro alla Scala, and the deep magic she believed opera held. She laughed as she recalled how, as a little girl, she had been told that singing along with an aria while making a wish would make it come true. It was a belief she still carried with her. Cavallaro, impressed by the investigators, extended an invitation to Milan. She insisted on securing them first-class tickets and accommodations in the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele, one of the most opulent locations in the city. As the evening deepened, she suddenly rose.
"Before we part, let me sing for you,"
she declared. Dressed in an elegant silver gown, the light of the room seemed to shimmer around her as she performed Ritorna Vincitor from Aida, her voice haunting, otherworldly. The beauty of her song was undeniable, but something lingered beneath it, a tension, a fragility. As she bid them goodnight, her final words carried an eerie weight.
"I will see you in Milan,"
she promised.
"You must be in the front row."
The investigators left Paris with a benefactor, a promise of luxury, and an unshakable sense that something unseen was already in motion. They went to their berths, and there they plunged into the oddest dream. The Dreamlands Express, a journey into shadows and secrets. The ivory platform of Ulthar. The investigator traveled to an otherworldly location, to the Dreamlands. Their journey through the Dreamlands began in Ulthar, a town where, by law, no man may harm a cat. The platform was a marvel of Ottoman ivory arches, raised above cobbled streets, bathed in the golden glow of an eternal sunset. Dreamers from many worlds had gathered here, drawn by the lure of the impossible. A train that existed only in sleep, a passage through realms of wonder and horror alike. As the Dreamlands Express arrived, its alien beast-like carriages slithered to a stop, their organic forms adjusting with a perfect unnatural stillness. Henri Peters, the same who had died facing the avatar of Yog Sothoth, greeted each passenger with a knowing nod, his mask concealing a face that had long since burned away. The journey to Dylath-Leen. The train departed as Ulthar's sunset deepened into an eternal twilight, passing sleepy farms and cottages, their forms shimmering with dreamlike unreality. The river Sky flowed alongside them, its waters singing softly in an ancient, unknowable tongue. At Dylath-Leen, a black basalt city of merchants and cutthroats, new passengers boarded. The delegation from Sarnath, clad in opulent robes, their laughter sharp, their smiles hiding a deep arrogance. The beings of Ib, grotesque, flabby creatures whose very presence churned the stomach. They shuffled aboard silently, their large, watery eyes filled with something ancient and mournful. Aboard the train, tension simmered between the two groups. The beings of Ib, survivors of a massacre long forgotten in the waking world, had come to seek justice from King Kuranes, while the Sarnathians mocked them in whispers, plotting mischief. Some dreamers found themselves dragged into the pranks, as the Sarnathians stuffed beings of Ib into the roof corners like grotesque ornaments. Others, repulsed, helped the beings down, earning quiet gratitude and perhaps the favor of something older than Sarnath itself. Taking a minute with Henri, Rose asked,
"By chance, have you ever met Duchesne and Radmila Vukcevich?"
To which Henri replied cryptically,
"I think they are here, trapped somewhere beyond the Gulf of Nodens."
The journey to Tsar. The next leg of the voyage was long and hypnotic. The train vaulted the blue-green river Sky, sailing across the vast forest of Parg, where okapi grazed amid resin groves and giggle lizards darted between the trees. Snow-capped Mount Lerion loomed in the distance, its peak obscured by silver mist. This was a time of strange conversations. The Sarnathians wooed the most charismatic dreamers. Father Giovanni, eager to turn them into unwitting allies in their games. The beings of Ib remained silent, but their unblinking stares seemed to weigh each passenger as if measuring their worth. Zusa, the dream dancer, boarded late, leaping onto the train at the last moment, promising to dance for them all the following night. And yet not all who wished to board the train were welcome. At a lonely stop in the mist, a madman from Tsar stood on the platform, pleading to be let aboard. His words were a garbled prayer of fear, his body trembling from terrors unseen. Henri watched him, impassive.
"He is already lost,"
the conductor murmured. But Giovanni, the priest among them, did not turn away. He approached the man, offering him salvation. Had Giovanni saved him, or simply pushed him further into madness? The city of lost dreams. The train finally arrived at Tsar, where impossibly lush gardens and Grecian temples shimmered in the sunlight. It was a place of beauty, yet no passenger disembarked. For Tsar was the abode of unformed dreams, a graveyard of forgotten hopes and discarded visions, a place where the lost souls of the dreamlands wandered, half real, never again to wake. Henri gave a rare warning.
Do not set foot in Tsar. Those who do never leave.
And so the train lingered only long enough to take on its final, most ominous passenger. Marco, Claudia's twin brother, long dead yet never truly gone, stepped aboard as though he had always belonged.
I have been waiting for you,
he told her softly.
Now we can go home together.
And as the Dreamlands Express thundered onward toward its second great banquet, the air grew thick with unseen tension. For Marco was no mere dream, and Claudia was no longer the only soul in her body. A church on wheels, a priest's delusion. While Claudia wrestled with the impossible reunion, Giovanni faced his own reality collapse. The very fabric of the Dreamlands, the beast-driven train, the unearthly landscapes, the whispering voices in languages not meant for human ears, threatened his fragile faith. He could not allow this, and so he changed it. By sheer force of will, Giovanni reshaped the Dreamlands Express into a rolling cathedral, its towering pavilions becoming spires, its soft carpets turning to cold stone, its gilded arches adorned with stained glass depictions of saints and martyrs. To the others, it was still the Dreamlands Express. But to Giovanni, it was the chariot of God, a vessel that would carry him through the nightmare without breaking his mind. The madman of Tsar, a sin too great to repent. The madman at Tsar, a man whose mind had long since snapped beneath the weight of Dreamland's horrors, waited patiently in his cage. Giovanni watched him with pity.
Repent, my son,
he said.
Let the Lord take you into his embrace.
The madman stared, shaking, and then, as if struck by divine judgment, he cast himself against the bars of his prison, again and again, plunging into the abyss beyond. Had Giovanni saved his soul, or had he simply damned it faster than the Dreamlands could? The murder of Black Jack and the imprisonment of Mironim Mare. But the train held another darkness still. The investigators discovered a crime most foul, the murder of Black Jack, a small black kitten beloved by the Ulthar cats. The train's very balance was at stake, for Ulthar had laws against harming a cat, and the Dreamlands Express could not risk their wrath. The clues led them to Mironim Mare, a strange golden-eyed man who was not what he seemed. His lies unraveled under scrutiny, and as the investigators pieced together the truth, they cornered him. Henri, the ever-dutiful conducteur, declared
justice must be done.
And so Mironim Mare was locked away, his fate uncertain. The train rolled on, toward the next banquet, toward the next mystery. And in the quiet of the night, Marco watched Claudia from the shadows.